Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just wait for just a moment while we let people join in from the Zoom.
Oh my gosh, look at everybody. Hi.
I'm personally really thrilled to be joined by Lexi Kohanski, who I had the pleasure of actually hearing speak this weekend over Shabbat. And so I can say firsthand that you are all in for a treat. Lexi Kohanski is the director of online learning at the Torah Studio. She is the creator of the YouTube channel T for Torah. She studied at the Conservative Yeshiva, Pardes, SVARA, and Hadar. Those are all learning institutions. And she's looking at this teaching as a queer white Ashkenazi trans woman. And so I think that we are all really blessed to be learning from you. I'll say that just once more. Just a housekeeping note, Lexi will be sharing some questions for the audience throughout the presentation. So we do intend on keeping the chat open. Please know that the chat is to answer the questions that Lexi poses to the audience and also to share relevant, respectful questions that you may have for Lexi that we will get to hopefully in due time. So thank you all again for being here. And Lexi, I will turn it over to you whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much, Mara. Hi, everyone. It's good to see all of you. It's such a pleasure to be here teaching with my Jewish learning. Yeah, I'm Lexi, and I've got some slides. Can people see the slides? No, great. Okay, let's get started because we got a lot of stuff to get into in this hour. The title of this talk is Encountering Gender at Creation, and this is me. Mara already said all this. So what are we in for in the next hour? Just an overview of what's about to come with some section titles. We're going to start with this question: what do we do when our texts hurt us? I'm approaching that question in particular as a queer, as a trans Jew. There's a lot of potential for pain when I come to engage with the Torah or the Talmud or other of our sacred texts. And that's kind of where I wanted to start our conversation of kind of what happens when we encounter gender at creation and that hurts us. And then we'll get into a little bit of how I read the Torah, because I do this all the time and I have developed some frameworks for understanding what these texts are trying to do for us, what they're trying to be here for, and what we can do when that hurt happens. And then we'll get into the kind of the juice of the day, which is looking at the verse in Genesis 1:27, which, if you don't know that reference offhand, that's the verse that says that God created people, male and female. And we'll just raise some problems and some questions that verse brings up for us. Then we will look at two different ways of understanding that verse, one from the Rambam, who was a 10th, 11th century philosopher and very important Jewish thinker. And we'll also look at it from the lens of the Zohar, which is a foundational 13th century mystical text in the Jewish tradition. And then we'll close by looking at what I think about the verse, how I interpret the verse myself in the commentary, in the Torah commentary that I'm working on, which I've called Aim Habanim, which means mother of children. So that's the plan for today. Interspersed throughout this, I'll have some questions for you all to answer in the chat because we're not in a room together and I want to do what I can to get to interact a little bit in a way that makes sense and is safe for people online. So I'll have some questions about these things throughout the hour. And I invite you to engage in the chat with some answers, some thoughts, as you feel comfortable and as is appropriate. Cool. Does it sound like a plan? Awesome. Let's get into it. I don't think I've ever actually started a shiur 5 minutes like on time. So normally I'd be starting 5 minutes in. I already feel like we're doing great today. So what happens when our text hurt us? Is the relationship between queer Jews and Torah necessarily a toxic relationship? By which I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the Torah that is hard to read, kind of no matter who you are these days, but just from my own personal perspective as a, oh, something happening. Can you all still see my screen?
Yes.
You can? Okay, great. Okay. From my personal perspective as a queer Jew, when I come to read these texts, there's a lot of potential for things not to go well, for pain to happen. And a lot of the queer Jews I talk to have a really hard time relating to the Torah, relating to our texts for that reason, that they're really hard to engage with, that they are, written thousands of years ago and they don't speak the same language we do. There's a lot of potential for misunderstanding. There's a lot of potential for it to say things that just seem directly contrary to what we know to be true, to what we believe in, to what our identities are. And I'd like to propose today, obviously, that queer Jews and Torah do not have to be in a toxic or a painful relationship. And most of what we're doing today is exploring how that relationship can be positive and fruitful in our lives. And hopefully, even if you're not queer or trans like yourself, hopefully there'll be some content to relate to from whatever your particular identity structure is. I think there'll be something here for everybody. I have given some talks before about some halakhic work that I've written, some kind of Jewish and legal work that I've done on thinking about trans Jews and mitzvahs and being in relationship with the Torah and with God. And every time I've done this, I've gotten the question something like this, which is, why are you committed to this tradition when it makes you so angry? Because it's true. There's a lot of stuff that Jews have written about trans people and queer people that makes me really angry, that is wrong, that is hurtful and is painful and makes it hard for me to show up. And somebody always asks me, well, if it makes you so angry, if it's so upsetting to you, why are you still here? And the reason I give is because the Torah is my life, because this is all I have in this world. This is the best thing that I have in this lifetime. And I just want to offer us a little bit of framing of how it comes to be the best thing, because, okay, it's the only thing in your life. Maybe you've got a sad life, but I don't, thank God. And I want to offer some people just some ways that I've come to find that the Torah is a positive presence in my life, even like in my full queerness and my full transness. So here's the question. How do we respond when we read texts that seem to contradict what we know to be true? Let's get into it. So this is a little bit of how I read the Torah. And I'm using the language of the Torah specifically, which maybe like is just this book, but can also, the word Torah can also refer to kind of any Jewish sacred text or learning. And in fact, I think the things that I'm about to share could apply to any sacred text, any text that is sacred to you. And actually, I think that this kind of relationship that I'm about to talk about is part of what makes a text sacred. Because it's possible to read the Torah and not relate to it as a sacred text, but just relate to it like any other text you would read, as a historical document, as like you would relate to a novel, a work of fiction, something you would read in a magazine. But there's something special about relating to a text as sacred, and I want to share a little bit of what that is to me. So I like to start with this description from the book of Psalms about God's Torah. Here's what it says. Hashem's Torah is perfect, restoring life. Hashem's testimony is reliable, making the simple wise. Hashem, by the way, is a traditional name for God. It literally means the name. That's the name for God I'll be using through the rest of this talk. Hashem's guidance is direct, gladdening the heart. Hashem's mitzvot are clear, enlightening the eyes. Hashem's awe is pure, standing forever. Hashem's sentences are truth, collectively just. These are the things that are dearer than gold and abundant finery, and sweeter than honey and honeycomb. There's a lot in here. And I'd like us to focus on, obviously, the two things I bolded. Hashem's Torah is perfect, restoring life. These are the things that are dearer than gold. So a few questions for folks that I want to invite folks to think about and answer in the chat, and I'll read some of them. Taking these verses as a statement of what the Torah is supposed to be and supposed to do for us, does this seem like a description that captures your experience? Does this feel true to you? Where does this description align? And where does it fall short for you? And is this a vision of Torah that inspires you? I'll pause for a couple of minutes while you put some answers in the chat. Matthew says, I love the concept of Torah as limited and incomplete as a result of human limitation. Hashem's Torah is perfect, but ours is not. And only together can we bring our Torah closer to the fullness of Hashem. It's a very interesting read, that Hashem's Torah is perfect, but the Torah we have isn't. And there's some work that needs to be done to make the Torah that we have closer to Hashem's Torah. We're gonna get some tools for doing that in a minute. Torah is perfect insofar as it is open to interpretation. That's a strong thread of like every generation, the Torah has to be renewed by the people who are living the Torah now. Yeah. Hashem's Torah is perfect reminds me of what I said last night at Psalms, the comfort of God's justice being unlike human justice. So being perfect makes sense to me. Yeah, that there's something about the qualities of something coming from Hashem, of something being sacred, that makes it unlike things that humans produce on their own. And I think that's a lot of what makes the Torah worth engaging with, is that I'm not assuming that it's like every other text that I read. And Daniel shares, yes, but so much of written and lived Torah speaks against my history as a woman and my life as a trans man. Yeah. We're gonna get into that. I think that's a nice place to move from. It seems like the Torah doesn't match this description. It seems like there's so much stuff in the Torah that is not perfect, that is not gladdening the heart, that is not reliable, that doesn't make people smarter, that actually makes people more hateful and do really bad things in the world. So like, what gives? If this is kind of the mission statement of what Torah is trying to be for us, then like, it seems like the Torah is not living up to that mission. Or to put it another way, our relationship with the Torah is not living up to this ideal. Let's get one more piece of relating to a sacred text. The main thing I want to take away from this is that when I come to read the Torah, I assume that what it has to say is perfect. I assume that what it has to say is trying to restore my life. And if it isn't, then I'm reading the text wrong. Not the text is saying something that's not true, but I'm not understanding it correctly. And I think that's something that's hard for us to do because we're so critical, and we're trained to be critical for good reason with all the texts that we engage in. But when we come to the Torah, part of what makes that a sacred experience for me is that I'm assuming that it's right. And if it seems to be saying something that's not right, then I've got the problem. If that seems a little bit troubling or problematic to you, we're going to see something from Rambam that I hope will make it a little better. But first, let's read this piece from Mishnah Avos. The Mishnah is kind of the second text after the Torah. And it's got statements from rabbis who were speaking around a little bit before the destruction of the Second Temple and a couple of generations after. So here's what one of them has to say. Ben Bagbag, who, by the way, is likely the name of a rabbi who converted to Judaism. Ben Bagbag says, turn the Torah over and over, for all is in it, and gaze into it, and turn gray and old in it, and do not move away from it, for you have no better measure than the Torah. And Ben Hey, also probably a convert, says, according to the pain or according to the effort is the reward. And Rabbi Ethan Tucker at Hadar comments on this Mishnah that the fact that it says, for all is in it, implies that there is an all that precedes the it. Like, what's everything that's in the Torah? It's that we come to the Torah already bringing our context, our life stories, and our sense of right and wrong. And the Torah is not asking us to put that aside. All of that is already in the Torah. Our true beliefs, our stories, our moment in time is already inside of the Torah, and the Torah already knows what's right and wrong in our world and in our lives today, right now. And we turn it over and over, searching for that, because everything is already there. Everything about who we are is already in the Torah, even when it really seems like the Torah does not acknowledge us, or when the Torah does acknowledge us, it acknowledges us in a way that is hateful or dismissive or minimizing. Even when it seems that way, what is true and what is right is already always in there. We just have to keep turning it over and turning it over every generation. Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of framing, let's look at the verse that is maybe one of the most problematic verses for queer and trans Jews in the Torah. So I'm not pulling any punches here. Here it is. Vayivra Elokim asa adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elokim bara oso Zohar u'nekeva bara osam. And Elokim created the person in their image. The image of Elokim, Z created here, male and female, Z created them. this translation might not be using the words that you're used to. The name Elohim is a transliteration of the name of God that's used in this verse. Often it's translated just as God. So you might have heard this verse say, meaning like, and God created Adam in his image. I haven't translated it that way. I've translated it just as Elohim. But when you see that, you can read God. And also I've used two sets of gender neutral neopronouns, z, zir, zirs, for Elohim, for Hashem, for God, and z, here, here's for the first person, who is apparently, according to this verse, neither only male nor only female, but both, or at least it's not clear what gender the first person is. So I've used these gender neutral neopronouns to try to communicate some of that gender ambiguity. I hope that's not too confusing or off-putting for folks. But even if it is, it's maybe good that we're a little confused and a little bit off-put by something as big as the gender of God. That's maybe appropriate. So here's the question that I want to ask on this verse. When it says male and female, he created them, what are the problems and questions that come up for you with this verse about the gendered nature of humankind? Assuming you do have problems. If you don't, then maybe you don't need this whole shiur, but assuming you do have a problem, or a question that's raised by this verse, what would that be? I want to invite folks to put some answers in the chat, and I'll take a look at some of them. Matthew asks, is male and female establishing a gender binary or reflecting two ends of a continuum? Awesome question. We will get to that towards the end. Lila says, it sets up a binary. Yeah, that's definitely a problem, that it sets up a binary between male and female. And that's a problem because we know from our lived experience that it's not true that gender is a binary where you can only be male or only be female and it never changes. So if that's what we're reading the Torah to mean, then that contradicts something that's like a fact about human nature. And that demands interpretation. So, and Lisa asks, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? Does that have anything to do with gender, or are they two separate thoughts? I love that question. The verse says the same time, created in the image of God and gender. So maybe they have something to do with each other. We'll definitely explore that. Deborah asks, main question would be how male and female are defined, and are those the only choices? Excellent question. It doesn't really say what is male, what is female, and is there anything else beyond that? Diane asks, if God created male and female in God's image, doesn't that mean that God is both male and female? You're anticipating the Zohar. We will get to that in a bit. Catherine says, male created first is problematic. That's interesting. So the fact that it says male first might mean that the male was created first. Actually, I never thought of that one. It's an interesting problem to raise. And Anne shares, since God does not have a body and male and female are both in God's image, I learned that maleness and femaleness are not based on body parts. That's a really good thing to learn. And implicit in that is the question of what does it mean? The question we saw earlier of, is the image of God and gender, are those things related to each other because they're both in the verse? And you're already working towards an answer, a beautiful answer. Chrissy asks, where is intersex? Huge question, super, super important. Intersex erasure happens far too often, especially in trans-focused conversations. So I'm really glad you brought that in. Where is intersex? Hopefully I'll mention that. I'll touch on that towards the end. Okay, there's a lot of really good questions in the chat. I encourage people to check those out. But basically the problems that we're raising are around the gender piece of this, that it seems like it's maybe a binary, where you can either only be male or only be female. And also the question of how is gender related to the image of God? Is it related? How is it related? And if we read this verse and we think that what it means is that the gender binary is real, meaning you can only either be male or female and you can't change between them, and there's no kind of gradient or spectrum going on there, it's just male and just female, and you're either one or the other, and that's it. If we read the verse and think that it means that, I want to suggest that based on the verse from Psalms that says Hashem's Torah is perfect, restoring life, that can't be what the verse means. And if that can't be what the verse means, then we've got some work to do to figure out what it does mean. So we've got some help in that journey. And some of you are already there and you're already offering amazing answers. And I love that. And if you are already there, I want to offer you just some tools that might help you clarify your process that you already have and go deeper. And if you're like, yeah, this really is challenging and it kind of makes me just want to throw the book away and not engage with it at all, I'm hoping that some of the framework I'm about to present will open a path that is not, I'm not saying it's easy necessarily, but a path that exists for us to engage with these things, moving through the hurt and the pain that they cause on first reading. Not to deny that that pain is there, not to deny that it's not real, that it's not part of our experience, but I want us to come away from this year not having that be the place where we stop, and not having that pain be a thing that stops us from digging into what is beautiful about this verse, or what can be beautiful when we engage with it. Okay. So 2 different points, 2 different ways to approach a text that seems to be wrong. We've got Rambam and Zohar. Let's start with Rambam. Rambam had some interesting things to say about Torah and science. We'll start with his book, The Guide for the Perplexed, which is his most controversial work. It's a work of philosophy, kind of explaining how the Torah makes sense and is true, and like he wrote this to a student who was confused about how to read the Torah because it seemed like the Torah was contradicting natural science, or we would just say like science today. And he wrote this whole blog book explaining how to work through that confusion. So here's something he says in his introduction. We also stated that the expression, the works of creation, signifies natural science. What he's doing here is he's saying there's this phrase, the works of creation, that refers to like the creation story, that the world was created in 7 days. Or the world was created in 6 days, and on the 7th day God rested, and that's also part of the creation of the world. And all of that story is referred to as the works of creation. And what he says here is that story is in line with natural science, which is a pretty surprising thing to say, because we know, even he knew at that time, that the world was not created literally in 6 days, right? But what he's saying here is, yes, the world was not created in 6 days. We know that's a fact, about like a scientific fact that has been proven to be true. But when the Torah says that the world was created in 6 days, that is not a statement that contradicts a fact that we have learned about the nature of the universe. There's a different way to understand the statement. The world was created in 6 days. The Torah is not asking you to choose between 6 days and like the Big Bang. The Torah is inviting you to merge those together and understand them in a different way. And then he says later on in the guide, basically what I just explained, the passages in the Torah which in their literal sense contain statements that can be refuted by proof, must and can be interpreted otherwise. So the kinds of interpretations that some of you are offering in the chat already on this verse, that's not something that is outside of the tradition. That's something that we want you to do. When things in the Torah when the Torah says things that literally are not true, then we have to interpret them otherwise. Why do we have to do that? Because the Torah has to say things that are true. That's part of what makes it sacred. And the last thing he says in his commentary on a different section of the Mishnah is kind of laying out some steps for how we arrive at a correct interpretation, at an interpretation that is in line with what we know from our experience of the world to be true. Here's what he says. When you encounter a word of the sages which seems to conflict with reason, like we just did with the male and female verse, which seems to conflict with reason, you will pause, consider it, and realize that this utterance must be a riddle or a parable. You will sleep on it, trying anxiously to grasp its logic and its expression, so that you may find its genuine intellectual intention and lay hold of a direct faith. What's he saying here? We kind of just went through, or we may have just gone through an experience like this. We found a verse that seems to conflict with reason. And what he leaves out here is like, when we find a verse like that, it might like bring up some feelings, some negative feelings, some hurt, some pain. That's part of it. And then he says, pause. Like, don't just let that take over. Step back for a second, pause, consider it, and realize that that can't be what it's saying. And then I bolded this part about sleep on it to highlight that it's like, this process takes time to arrive at a correct interpretation of the Torah. It doesn't always come easily. You have to try pretty hard sometimes. And to the extent that that's like worth it for you, I hope this gives you permission to stay with those verses and to wrestle with them when they do seem to conflict with what you know to be true with your own experience, with your identities. Please wrestle with them. Please don't let them get away with harming you, with hurting you, with contradicting your truth. Sleep on these things. Try anxiously to grasp their logic and their expression, because behind them is, in Rambam's words, a genuine intellectual intention, what I've been referring to as that the Torah restores life. There is something there that is life restoring. There is something there that is genuine. And like Rambam, I'm assuming that that's there. I assume that that's part of the text. So I assume it's worth sleeping on it and trying anxiously to grasp its logic and the kind of language that it's speaking. So that's Rambam's approach. And I'd like us to think a little bit about, if we're using Rambam's principles, how would you resolve the difficulties of this verse? I've already had some people moving in that direction in the first question already, but I'd just like to pause for a second to let you all process that while I go answer the door. To let you process this principle of when something seems to contradict reason, we need to wrestle with it a bit and find out what it is saying that is, in fact, in line with reason, that does, in fact, restore our lives. Throw some thoughts in the chat if you have any. I will be right back. Daniel shares male and female and everything flowing through in between them. I think that's a really strong reading. And it like preserves what the words say. It's male and female, but it's also, that's not the full picture. It's everything flowing through and between them. And we'll see that reflected towards the end also. Matthew shares, I would see this as reflecting a gender expansive landscape. Male and female could be used here to represent any possible gender or sex. Yes, we'll see something like that in the Zohar in a second, that when it says male and female, it doesn't mean literally only male and female. It just is referring to the concept of gender. In the language, in the words that the Torah had available to it 3,000 years ago, didn't have a word for gender. All it had was male and female. So it says that, but it's teaching us not about literally male and female the way we understand them today. It's teaching us that people are created with gender, whatever that gender may be. Bay shares, sometimes it is only in the unreasonable that we can discern very profound meaning. Accepting the illogic of some things as simply that can be liberating. That's an awesome segue into what the Zohar has to say, because the Zohar as a mystical text loves to soak in the things that are incomprehensible. So let's go into the Zohar. Okay, this is the introduction to the Zohar. This is going to be a little bit dense, so stick with me. Let's get into it. Zohar is listing the mitzvahs that can be learned from the story of creation. And the 9th mitzvah is this one. Mitzvah 9, to have compassion for the poor and to give them sustenance. As it is written, let us make the person in our image, like our likeness. And the person, the Hebrew word for person is Adam. So it says, let us make Adam. What's Adam? A union encompassing male and female. In our image, the verse says, what does that mean? In our image means wealthy. Like our likeness means poor. That is, from the aspect of maleness, wealthy, and from the aspect of femaleness, poor, so that these are in a single partnership. And one has compassion for the other, and gives to the other and bestows goodness upon them. Thus, a person below must be wealthy and poor in one binding, and must give one to the other, and must bestow goodness one to the other. So, this approach of the Zohar to this verse is very different from Rambam's in the sense that it's not trying to understand the words on their own terms. It's taking the words of the verse and spinning them out into a new lesson that is only like vaguely connected to the words. And this is I'm offering this to show you another possible way of engaging with a verse that seems to be wrong, is to kind of take it on to a whole other level, which is to say, male and female doesn't really mean male and female, not even in a more expansive sense of male and female referring to the concept of gender in general. Male and female actually means male refers to the state of having stuff, and female refers to the state of not having stuff, of needing things. Obviously, that reading is seeped in misogyny, but if you totally disconnect it from actual like embodied gender, there's something to this, that like we find ourselves in situations where we have aspects of ourselves that are wealthy, and we have aspects of ourselves that are lacking. And the mitzvah, the way we make the world better, is to give what we have to give and to receive what we need to receive. And that's what it means when it says a person below must be wealthy and poor in one binding, that we have to strive to have the full capacities of being able to receive and being able to give. We give when it is time to give, We receive when it is time to receive. And that reading of this verse has absolutely nothing to do with gender. It's just using those words to reference a totally different aspect of human consciousness. If that's a little bit out there for you, then I do want to suggest that we can also take this interpretation where it says a person below must be wealthy and poor in one binding, and also setting aside the problematics of being wealthy and being poor and those associations with maleness and femaleness, which are worth bringing up for sure, but it's not why I'm bringing the text right now. If we just take this statement, a person below must be wealthy and poor in one binding, and read that back into the verse, then the verse is saying that everybody has to be both male and female, that's a mitzvah. So the Zohar already is opening up in this, like, it goes, like, you take the verse to a totally different place. You go like way out there, making associations. Like, what does this make me think of? What's this related to? It could be this, and then this, and then this, and you go a few steps away. But then when you bring it back, it can actually teach you something really exciting about gender itself, which is that everybody is supposed to be both male and female at once, which is a new reading. I mean, it's a reading that some of you have already proposed in the chat because you know what's true. But the Zohar is getting us there in a different way. Okay, that's the Zohar. And I've shared a lot about what other people think about this verse, and I've been saying, as people share in the chat, that we will get to that concept towards the end. This is now towards the end, where I'm going to share how I personally interpret this verse, and I hope it'll demonstrate some of the concepts that I've been talking about, some of the approaches that I've been sharing of how to arrive, how to struggle with these verses that seem not to be true, that seem to be painful, how to spend time and struggle with them and arrive at truth and arrive at something that is deeper, arrive at a way of reading the Torah that is restoring life. So should we get into it? Okay. So I got the verse on the left here just to refresh our memories in case we forgot. The verse is, and Elohim created the person in Zir image, that is to say, and God created the person in his image. And Elohim created the person in Zir image. In the image of Elohim, Z created here, male and female, Z created that. How do I read this verse? One ought to read the verse as follows. And Elohim created the person in her own image, in the image of a person, just as all creatures are created in their own images, which are unique to them. The move that I'm making here is the verse says, and Elohim created the person in Zir image, meaning Elohim created the person in God's image. That's usually how we read the verse. But what it says in Hebrew is a little bit ambiguous. It's not clear who his image is referring to. Is it referring to God, or is it referring to the person? And I'm suggesting that what it's saying is not that God created the person in God's image. I'm suggesting we can read this as saying God created the person in the image of people, in the image of humankind, which is to say, just as every creature is created in their own image, which are unique to them, so too people are created in an image that is unique to us, the image of a person. But the person also has the unique quality of being created in the image of Elohim, with the power of the combined name of Elohim. That is to say, that it is in the power of humans to join with all of creation to enact their will and to be diverse within their own species to an incredible degree. So the question that I'm struggling with here is, why does the verse say twice that the person is created in God's image, right? It says in the first part, Elohim created the person in your image. And in the second part, it seems to say almost the same thing. In the image of Elohim, God created them. Z created here. So what I'm trying to do here is explain how these are actually saying two different things. The first thing that it's saying is we are created in the image of people. We are created in the image of a human. And the second thing that it's saying is what we normally understand is that we are also created, in addition to being created in our own image, just like every life form that is created in the world, we're also created in the image of God. Which is to say, someone was asking earlier, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? And I do this close. This is a little bit obscure where I'm getting this from in this text, but the reason that I didn't translate the name Elohim as God this whole time is because Elohim is a specific name that, again, in the Zohar has a specific quality to it. And the quality that the name of Elohim has is the ability to combine with things. So when it says that we're created in the image of Elohim, what that means is that we are created with the power to join with other things that have been created, to join with other life forms, to join with the rest of the world, with the rest of nature, and to make new things through those combinations. And also in the same way that the name Elohim implies combination and diversity, so too, because we're created in God's image, in the image specifically of Elohim, that means that we as people are really diverse within our own species. We have so much incredible diversity between me and you, between people in one place, between people in another place. Everybody's so different, and there's so much variety in what it means to be a person. And what I'm saying here is the fact of that variety, when we encounter difference and diversity among each other, that is a reflection of the image of God. It's a divine thing, our diversity and our difference. And then it's also a divine thing that across that difference, we're able to combine and relate with each other, and create really magical new things out of those relationships. But there's more. As if that weren't enough, there's a whole third part of the verse, which says, God created the person male and female, meaning every single person, both male and female. We saw that in the Zohar. We saw that already in the chat. Every single person is made both male and female, which I get from the fact that it says God created them, plural, not just him or here in my gender neutral language. Like it was saying in the rest of the verse, it was in the singular. In this part of the verse, it's in the plural. What does that teach me? That it's not just the first person, it's every single person. And someone raised the question of where do we find intersex in this conversation? One little place we find it is that Rashi, who's a commentator on the Torah, brings a midrash, which is kind of like rabbinic fan fiction on this verse, that says that the verse male and female God created, that means that the first person was created what's called an androgynous, which is basically referring to an intersex person, a visibly like intersex person. So that's a little spot where we can find that. And the more we can play those things out, the better, because we don't talk about that enough in our conversations about gender. So I'm really glad that somebody brought that. And I'm grateful to be able to bring a small part of that into here, even though it's not yet enough. Okay. And then the Torah says explicitly at the end of the verse, Z created them, meaning in their own image and in the image of God and male and female. that this is not so only for the first person, but every single person is created with these three attributes. God created them, meaning God created us. Every person has the quality of being in our own image, being in the image of a person, and in the image of Elohim, with the capacity for diversity and the capacity to combine and create new things, and male and female. We've got all three of those things, every single one of us, we have that capacity. Here's a different way I could read the verse. Male and female, Z created them. Do not read them, but with them. This is a pun on the Hebrew. It's a different vocalization. The Hebrew says them, otam, but if you read it not as otam, but as itam, then it means with them. Male and female, God created with them, meaning that the significance of male and female are created by means of a partnership between the creator and people in every age and society. Therefore, there is no single definition for gender. This is something that somebody raised. I saw some people raise in the chat earlier. What does male and female mean? And given that our sense of what is true changes from generation to generation, how do we engage with a statement like God created them male and female? Here is one possible way of responding to those questions, which is, yeah, what gender means does change from generation to generation. How gender expression shows up is different from society to society. Our understanding of gender now is so different from our understanding of gender 50 years ago. And I'm saying that's also potentially in the Torah in a kind of a hidden way, that God creates gender with us. The significance and what male and female means is generated in combination with God and people in every age and in every society. And that's why you will not find in the whole Torah a definition for male and female or an explanation of what gender is, because that doesn't exist for all time, once and for all. It's created new in every generation with us. Okay, here's a third thing, and this is going to be the last one, and then hopefully we'll have a couple minutes for questions at the end. Okay, the statement male and female. We've had a lot of people say, like, well, is that a binary? Is that not a binary? Is it a spectrum? What's going on here? How can we understand this in a way that it's true? Here's how I understand those words in a way that speaks to the truth of my experience and my understanding of gender. Male and female. This is a binary which is not on a spectrum because the concept of separation is not mentioned here. Don't worry about that. The point is, the unique quality of this binary is that any change in maleness does not affect the amount of femaleness or vice versa. Male and female are not opposed to each other as in a spectrum. Rather, they are arrayed on a system of axes and form a plane or a field. That is to say, on a spectrum or a gradient, you've got like blue on one end and yellow on the other end. And the farther away you get from blue, like the closer you get to yellow, the less blue you are. And I'm saying gender is not like that. It's not the case that the farther away you get from the closer, the more female you are, the less male you are. It's not like that. It's not a gradient. It's actually a system of axes that forms a plane, which looks like this picture. A sign for those who understand is to put the color blue on one axis and the color yellow on a second axis. And in the center, you find a color that is totally new called green, as well as many other colors. So too, on the plane that is made between male and female, there are many genders. And if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, since I'm here to tell you, I'll share. Saying that, like the common image that we have of like, first of all, it's either male or female and that's it. That's definitely wrong. And even the common image that we have of gender being on a spectrum, usually what people mean when they say spectrum is actually gradient, where you go from where the further you get towards one end, the less you have of the other end. And there's still basically only two options. You're just like more or less male or female. You've got different percentages of them. Like you're 75% male, 25% female. And that's maybe what some of us think of when we think of non-binary genders. But what I'm suggesting is that it's not like that. It's like this picture here where you've got as much blue as you want and as much yellow as you want. And if you've got a lot of both of those, then actually combining them creates a new color, green. Combining the different elements of male and female doesn't just lead to 75% male and 25% female, and that's it. It leads to entirely new genders and entirely new gender expressions that can't be understood in terms of blue and yellow. This is like what Simone de Beauvoir says, where I get this whole image from, which is, if you try to understand the color green in terms of blue and yellow, it's not going to work. You can't say, if you want to give someone a sense of what green is, or of what the combination of blue and yellow is, you can't say, well, it's, some blue and some yellow, and you put them together. You have to have an intuition of what the color green is to understand the combination of blue and yellow. What I'm suggesting is this verse teaches in the same sense that to have a sense of what it means to be non-binary, to combine male and female, you have to have a sense of a different gender that is maybe made through the combination of male and female, but is actually beyond what you could get if you only have the concept of male and female. There is something deeper there, and I'm saying that that's hidden in this verse when it just says male and female. Obviously, there's more genders than male and female, and the Torah acknowledges that, even though it only seems to state those two things. So that's all that I've got on this verse. I hope I've demonstrated a little bit of how I come to a verse that has caused a lot of us a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, both from our own reading of it and from other people's reading of it. I hope I've given you some tools and some good examples of how I work through a situation like this. And I hope I've given you some more opportunities, opened some more paths for you to relate to Torah in a way that is more restoring to your life, that is a little bit more precious, a little bit more joyful, a little bit more gladdening of the heart.